And good morning again, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of our second virtual OpenDev event. I'm here, Jonathan Bryce, with Ashley Ferguson, who is our co-host for this event. And we have had an interesting week with a lot of participation. I've been really excited to see how many people have been speaking up and sharing over the last couple of days, and we have one more day of discussions to go, and then that will be a wrap for this event. But that's not the only virtual event that you'll get to participate in this year. Why don't you tell them about the other two, Ashley?
Yeah, so we have a third virtual OpenDev coming up in the series, and that will be our last virtual OpenDev for this season at least. And so that's going to be all about containers in production. So that's August 10th through 12th. So make sure to sign up for that. Registration's currently open. So go ahead and sign up, and we'll see you in a couple weeks for that one. And then we also just announced our Open Infrastructure Summit. That will also be virtual. That will be later in October. And the CFP is currently open for that. So get your proposals ready and go ahead and submit them before August 4th. And we will see you at the summit. And you can submit that CFP at cfp.openstack.org.
So we had a lot of interaction yesterday, and we had some really good discussions around consuming bare metal, and took a lot of notes. Thank you to Mohammed and Julia for leading the discussions yesterday. This is the Etherpad from yesterday, for those of you who aren't familiar, and we'll have one of these for today as well. There were a couple of items in here that were flagged for follow-up, and so if you are interested in joining, here it is. Okay, interested in joining these discussions, you can go to this Etherpad and add your name and contact info. Around line 205 is one of the follow-up sections, as well as in the line 245 area. There are a couple of discussions that people are planning to follow up on after this week. And I think that one of the really interesting discussions was the one around redfish and IPMI yesterday, and hearing how people are using both and interacting with their hardware. So there's kind of some rough data in here about how people are actually using those protocols. And if you didn't participate yesterday and want to go add in your comments or your +1s on any of these, then feel free to do that. These Etherpads live on forever. And as I said, we'll have some more of those today, and so jump into the Etherpads. They're a really important part of the interaction and the way that we share information. And I'll hand it back to Ashley to run through the basics of how to participate.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, so welcome back if you have been to the last day or so of this event. I'm just going to roll through a couple things here to help you have a great experience. So obviously we're using Zoom as our main tool, and then we're also using Etherpads, which Jonathan was just showing you. So for Zoom, we'll use the chat function in there for all relevant topic discussions, technical things, questions. If you want to jump into the conversation, feel free to drop it in there. And then please keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking. We do want to hear from you. This is a collaborative event, obviously, so we want to hear from you in your experience. So you can unmute yourself and jump into the conversation. But when you're not speaking, please keep it muted just to eliminate any background noise. And then Etherpads, like Jonathan was just saying, these live on forever. It's where we take all of our notes, feedback, action items, and you can drop your contact info in there if you want to connect with others after the event. Very helpful. So like he said, we'll have one for this session today that we'll be using. And when you do drop your contact information in there, there'll be a section for that. Go ahead and put an asterisk at the beginning of your name if you're interested in jumping into the conversation. That way our moderators know that it's okay to maybe call someone out and say, hey, it looks like you have something to say about this, or just give you an opportunity to jump into the conversation. So you can mark your name with a little star. And if you need help at any time during the event, we have people waiting on the other end of events at openstack.org to help you with any login questions or technical things you might need help with. And like I said, the Zoom chat we'll use for any technical questions relevant to the topic discussions. And then we also sent out a tips and tricks Etherpad that we will drop in the chat right now that has any other questions that you might have. And as a friendly reminder, this is an OpenStack Foundation event, so we do abide by the OpenStack Foundation Community Code of Conduct. So just as a reminder, please be courteous, conduct yourself professionally, and respect each other. And if there's something you need to report as a violation, you can visit the URL at the bottom there, openstack.org/code of conduct, and that'll have instructions on how to do that. And I'll throw it back to Jonathan.
All right. Just want to wrap up with some thanks. So thanks to our programming committee again, and for pretty much all of the events we do. We really rely on community members who volunteer to help us put together the content and kind of organize the event so that it'll be relevant and really tied into what the community is cares about and wants to focus on. And so for this programming committee, we had a great group of 5 people from different organizations who pitched in. So thanks to Mark, Keith, James, Julia, and Mohammed. And also want to thank our platinum and gold members from the OpenStack Foundation. These are the companies who help to fund the events that we do and the community organization activities. So thank you to these companies. And finally, I want to say thanks to everybody who has participated this week. And there were a lot of people from all over that signed up and joined at different times through the week. And that is really the heart of these OpenDev events, is getting all of these different perspectives from different organizations and different parts of the world together to share and pitch in and help us all understand new things and learn about new use cases and really kind of move the state of our knowledge forward. So thanks to everybody who joined this week. So for today, we have 2 parts and then a wrap up at the end. Part 1 will be around networking and automation in the data center on the networking side. And then part 2 will be dealing with security. And for the wrap up, we'll bring our moderators back and kind of go through the follow-up items that we've identified and figure out what the best way to take those forward and work on them in the coming weeks after the event. So stick around for that if there are items that you'd like to see us work on in the community, in the coming weeks. So with that, we can get started, and I will hand it over for the first section to Mark Goddard to moderate the discussion this morning.
Well, hello everyone. Sorry, I've got one of these strange laptops that looks up your nose with the camera, so you haven't got the most flattering view of my face, but maybe if I look down like this, it's a little better. So today we're talking about networking and hardware automation. And for a little background about me, I've been working with OpenStack for about 6 years now. First at Cray, where we're looking at using it to deploy and manage clusters of high-performance computing machines, and eventually aiming for supercomputers. Moved on to Stack HPC after a couple of years, and since then I've been getting involved with lots of hands-on experience with real world usage of OpenStack for scientific computing largely, although other environments as well. And that often entails bare metal. And wherever OpenStack goes, networking is sure to follow. So I guess that's perhaps how I ended up with this session. By no means not a network engineer, but I've certainly spent enough time with it to be familiar with a lot of these topics. Perhaps we could hear from some of the active speakers we've got today. I think we've got Beth Cohen, Chris Price, and four from China Mobile today. Maybe Beth, if you're on.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
you. I want to share some network architecture. The mobile.
We're losing the connection a little bit there.
Okay. I say you means how do your machine attach the network. In fact, in our practice, we have multi NICs. The NICs is divided into 4 groups. One is device management NIC. That means the BMC port. Another 3 is 3 group is 1 group for the business network card. Another is the storage, then the business. This is the 4 groups of NICs. Of course, because our network architecture is 3 layer. At the bottom is the access layer, which means the server will connect to the TOR. And then the TOR will connect to our EOR. This is the core network. And then at the top is export network, which will connected to our BSS, OSS, and various such kind of application. So this is our network architecture. And okay, Mark.
Thank you. So what influences the the choice of NICs for those 4 different types of networks? Are they all the same, or are they different?
They are different because that means different NICs will have the different network plane. For the storage plane, for the business plane, for the management plane. This is some requirements from our application, NFV application.
So do those different NICs have different requirements, or are they all just the same NIC but on different networks?
Because sometimes our application needed different network plane is separated with others. So for some management network flow, it will be on the network management plane. For some business network flow on the business network card. So it is separated from each other.
Oh, I guess Mark means I'm also from China Mobile. I guess Mark means if the NIC is different, like gigabit or 10 gigabit. This question?
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Do they have different properties?
Different property. I think we have 2 gigabit and 2 10 gigabit. Oh, go ahead, Xiaoguang. Yeah.
Both. Yes, I think both business management or the storage network is 10 gigabytes. But for BMC, it's Can you
Hi.
get
Hi.
me point? Get
Question?
my point?
Yeah. Maybe we can put it in chat, like 2 gigabit to 10 gigabit.
So I don't know who's in control of the. Oh, it looks like it's Kendall. Kendall, maybe you could scroll up a little bit just to the context. So I put this in here at the beginning, just to kind of give some context to the discussion, and to get people thinking about perhaps not just their own environment that they're involved with, but the other environments that other people.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan, 2
Uh,
gigabit, 2 gigabit.
the other environments that other people might be using. So there are various different technologies and approaches and solutions to networking. And one of the nice things about using open infrastructure is that we can share and make use of the commonalities between those technologies and approaches, but we can also embrace the differences and allow different environments to focus on different things. And so perhaps you might want to just consider the different scenarios that we might use these tools in. And I've given a non-exhaustive list here, but how are the requirements different for each of these? Where are the places where the requirements are the same? And if you give an answer that is, let's say, specific to one of these environments, it would be good if you could just make that clear. Say that you're speaking particularly about an edge computing site. If you could make that clear, that would be really good, really helpful for everyone else's awareness. So we've got data center infrastructure, clusters or scientific computing supercomputers, cloud infrastructure, deploying the control plane hypervisors and various edge sites, whether they're near or far, or whatever the current terminology is for that. And then in some cases, we might allow access to multi-tenant bare metal instances. We could be talking about private cloud, public cloud, or telco, and probably lots of other things. So I guess just something to consider when we're discussing here. Next, Kendall, maybe you could scroll down again to the network architectures. So this first topic here, server physical connectivity. How do your machines attach to the network? There are lots of different ways to do this, from the very simple to the more complicated. Does anyone just keep it really simple and use a single NIC?
We actually try, this is Mohammed here. We actually try and keep it as simple as possible. And that's mainly because we've kind of started using a lot of 40 gig NICs. And so generally that is enough coverage for us to get whatever capacity we need, whether it's both Ceph like replication, and for something like Ceph, it can cover both the replication network and the public traffic. Or if it's a compute node, then 40 gig, it's generally hard to have a bunch of VMs push all that traffic through. So we try and go for one NIC. But yeah, that's kind of one of the things that we try to do. But we're trying to move towards, so all of our servers have two 40 gig cards, and we're trying to move to having them both bonded everywhere. But that introduces another kind of problem, which is like, do you do MLAG or do you do like ECMP and do something like BGP to the host and propagate routes everywhere? And so kind of like the layer 2 versus layer 3 on the host question starts coming up.
Yeah. What about for resilience. I mean, bonding is partly for improving throughput, but it's also for resilience. The idea you can lose a NIC or a switch even, and it's not a problem.
Yeah, I think for us, we've kind of deferred that issue to like another like in an architectural way, so that we don't really care if we lose a switch, we don't care if we lose a rack, because we have the ability of just live migrating. Well, not live migrating at this point, it will be a cold startup again, but we have the ability to recover quite quickly. I mean, in the case of Ceph, it doesn't even have a blip, but if the VMs die on a host, then we can recover relatively easily. Obviously, there's a downtime, but in my experience, switches are pretty reliable, and they're just going to keep on running for a long time without any issues.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a trade-off there between the complexity of bonding versus just having something nice and simple and hoping it doesn't break.
Yeah, maybe I can add a little bit to that discussion as well. I am George, and I'm stepping up here to replace Chris Price, who's not able to join due to time zone differences, or challenges rather. But I can add a bit of context from a telco perspective, similar to with Ericsson. And in that context, obviously, our telco infrastructure, in the telco infrastructure, we use multiple NICs, up to 100 gig, depending a bit on the use case, obviously, but not all of them, like control or out-of-band management is obviously doesn't have that kind of bandwidth. Also, of course, NICs are bonded, typically multi-chassis log, for instance, being used. That, of course, becomes a little challenging when looking at the redundancy of data plane traffic, because also many of the telco workloads use SR-IOV, and then you basically lose that part of the functionality and that the infrastructure provides. So a problem, a challenge here is that in that case, often it's up to the applications to provide some redundancy. That's why, for instance, we're also looking very much into smart NICs to kind of get that functionality back into the infrastructure. I guess we can talk about that in more detail then further down. Yep, just wanted to give a broad or a short overview of that from our perspective.
Yeah, thank you. So I suppose with the multi-chassis lag, the downside is there's no standard for that, right? It's generally proprietary protocol.
Yeah, and that's kind of been one of the things that is kind of like making us go back and forth, because with MLAG, it's easy to set up, relatively easy to set up. It's predictable on one side, but you're kind of locked into whatever pair of switches that you're using, which kind of makes it even hard to even transition to another vendor, because you're probably not going to be able to do like one switch at a time or something like that. And then you have the other alternative, which is using open APIs, like something like combination of like BGP on the host, peering to your top of rack switches, doing layer 3. But then that introduces a lot more complexity and making sure things are running happily.
It does, and some vendors do have the ability for the switch to actually recognize traffic and shut down part of the lag behavior. But even then, it's usually like, do I see an IP address and then I consider it good, or do I see LACP? And even things like iPXE can cause the switch to think that, hey, this thing's active. I can bring up the other link. wait, no, all of a sudden everything dies for however many seconds the hold down is.
There's an interesting note about shared BMC NIC. Is anyone using that? Is anyone sharing their sharing a port or NIC for a
I know
BMC?
some.
And
Sorry, I know some people do. There was one of the folks yesterday during one of the sessions made a comment that their BMCs don't support being on VLANs as part of the shared NIC. And that was one of the reasons why they hadn't gone to remote management of their machines.
Yeah, we don't, at least we don't. And the main reason for that is we literally and physically just don't want any of the BMC sitting anywhere on a network that's at all accessible by any of your hosts, because we're in a multi-tenant environment. So I'm assuming maybe this could work a little easier in a single tenant environment or be more okay, but in a multi-tenant, it's kind of a security hard no.
We usually recommend against bonding the NIC to the primary, the BMC NIC. This is raw personal. That creates all sorts of funniness.
so with bonding, is everyone using LACP, or are people using other bond modes like balance, TLB, or ALB?
I've only personally ever heard of LACP, so I'd love to hear a bit more about the other ones you brought up.
So the other two are quite interesting in that they don't require any configuration on the switch. I think they're bond mode 5 and 6. So the TLB is where it does transmit load balancing. And the bonding driver in the kernel just changes the MAC address according to the NIC that it's sending from. And I think that generally just works. ALB tries to do receive load balancing as well. And I tried to use it once and I did have some problems with it. It uses, I think it uses ARP to balance the responses to each NIC. So it's quite an interesting idea, and it's quite neat that you don't need to touch a switch. But it does have some issues. And I think as soon as you start adding things like VLANs on top, then it gets a bit unhappy.
It's really designed for the IP stack to be able to send traffic back and forth.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so I guess this one, these are mostly for throughput improvements and maybe not as much for high availability or anything like that, because I can't imagine that being very aware that the switch on the other side is not functioning properly.
The use case is largely designed as, yes, high performance, high throughput computing, where I have a bunch of minimally configured switches that aren't cross-connected, and all the hosts are plugged into them, so they all can talk the same basic way over these interfaces. And it works. The problem that you start running into when you actually try and use this in some production environments is other operating systems, or even Linux, you have to like turn off RP filter, because you end up in situations where the kernel will see different MAC for the same IP address and go, oh, something's wrong in the network. And it's not intentional, but it's just the way it's being perceived by other hosts.
I'm curious on this discussion of what's the highest capacity of networking gear that is still like financially reasonable to put across all machines, right? I feel like that's an interesting thing to talk about because maybe 10 years ago, if you asked everyone, is expecting 10 gig NICs in most servers a normal thing? No, it'd be like, no, what are you talking about? Now I'd say 10 gig is probably more of like, I'm guessing a standard. Maybe my view is a little skewed, but I'd love to hear if kind of where the standard in networking, where everyone feels the standard in networking is right now.
John, I think you need to turn up your microphone gain.
Is that any better?
Much better, thank you.
Ah, perfect. That explains it. Yeah, I was saying we seem to be seeing quite a lot of 25 gig Ethernet. I think in part because there's 100 gig switches means that you can have the fibers running at 100 gig. So you can have like 2 fibers going up if you want 200 gig. But then you have the breakout cables all doing 25 gig E. So when you've got a high density rack, you can basically just have one 100 gig switch at the top. I'm told the cost of that doesn't seem much of a premium on the 10 gig these days. But I don't know what they meant by much of a premium. I was just wondering if other people are seeing the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I can definitely confirm that. Although I also have no clue about the costs, really. I can't say. It's telco equipment, so there's a premium anyway. Yeah.
Something I've noticed is I see a lot of hardware manufacturers are natively shipping like 10 gig, like 10G base T, like on almost every server. It's kind of rare for any server. I mean, it probably some do come with 1 gig ports, but those usually are the ones that are covering kind of the lower end server scale.
Are you seeing 10 gig for the port that's doing the out of band management as well? Because I'm often seeing that as just still the 1 gig, but then there's a 10 gig next to it.
Yeah, no, I think I've still seen them as 1 gig. I've never seen a 10 gig BMC yet.
It's quite a bit wacky.
Well, and again, I think that's the kind of the interesting thing is maybe 10 years ago, we never saw a 1 gig BMC port. It were all 100 megabits because why would you ever put?
Fair point.
Fair so point. Eventually we'll have 100 gig BMC ports soon.
I guess the difference is the connector, isn't it? The 10 gig you typically get to.
Won't that make the servers boot faster?
It'd be good for virtual media.
Oh yeah.
Send an image over to your BMC very quickly.
As long as the BMC CPU can handle it.
Yeah. I guess today's top-end Xeons are tomorrow's BMCs.
I like the trend line. I had a use case. There's a break that's different than a little bit different because it's an edge use case, but worth adding to this list. What we do see a little bit of, this is nascent, but on edge devices, they don't have a lot of NICs. It's all built in. They do usually have Wi-Fi. And so the idea that you would create a redundant network between your hardwired with a preference for hardwired, and then be able to use the Wi-Fi network as a backup is an interesting use case from a redundancy perspective, because if a single NIC device goes off the network, you've lost it. But from an edge device, you don't want to put things on the Wi-Fi if you can avoid it. So there's an interesting, totally different NICs, potentially different IP addresses. I don't know. I'd have to work more on design for that, but it's worth including as a thing from an edge perspective on network redundancy, because most of those devices do have multiple NICs. They're just different protocols, different wire protocols.
I think this is a crazy question, but can you Pixie over Wi-Fi?
No.
I'm guessing it's not.
Wow.
I guess maybe someone wants to do it.
I mean, it's conceivable. It's just a DHCP is how the NIC responds. I just haven't seen anybody try.
I have never tried it, but I've seen the settings inside laptops, especially.
Oh, cool, Paul. Yeah, the edge thing was worth bringing up because I've actually seen some designs that intentionally like don't have plugged Ethernet, but contact-based Ethernet. The Hive.io team is what I'm thinking of specifically. And the idea is if you lift that machine off its tower, then basically it and all the things above it in the tower lose wired connectivity and have to switch to Wi-Fi connectivity. And I think that pattern is going to be pretty typical.
Can you repeat what you just said, the last part? Because I'm not sure I heard you. It sounded like
Sure. In their design, they have boxes that stack, and then they use contact for power and wired Ethernet.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so if you lift the tower, then everything loses wired connectivity in the stack. And so their designs, I don't know how well it works, but their designs are you're going to fall back to Wi-Fi as the networking equivalent. I don't know if they built that as a hardwired thing and they play with it, or they'd have I suspect they have two different NICs. But that would raise heck with the accompanying stack and applications and things like that. So yeah, there's ripple effects of the design implications, but that's what we're gonna. I'm Pis or the Raspberry Pis, which we do play with a lot, are very similar, and so you have to think through how that all is going to work if you want it, if it's a requirement. Superglue also works to keep things connected to networks. I'm joking. Julia's laughing good.
Or deny connectivity. I mean, security guys still occasionally say glue the USB ports.
Tried and true.
So if we look on line 107, what features do you look for in a NIC? It'd be interesting to hear from anyone who looks for anything non-standard in their NIC. Thinking any particular offloads, whether you need RDMA support, or even whether you need a smart NIC.
I would kind of be interested to understand if people are using smart NICs for much more beyond simple networking architectures that they do in the operating system. And the reason I'm saying this is because what I'm seeing is this interest in actually offloading things like OVS into the smart NIC and doing all sorts of other things in it, or packet filtering. And I'm wondering if anyone's actually even doing that, or if they're buying them in hopes of doing that at some point.
So I have a comment on that actually. So I'm working on a project right now, working with the new Connect X5 Mellanox cards, which are 100 gig cards, which are really interesting because they only work on AMD hardware because they require PCI Express 4, which only works on the newer AMD hardware. That's the only thing that supports it. And those have VXLAN offload. And that's a big thing that, at least as part of the work that we're working on in this, is need to be able to actually drive 100 gig. And there's no way that's going to happen with just a CPU on VXLAN. So the idea is using OpenStack and actually connecting those NICs to hardware VTEP switches that do VXLAN and pass the VNIs and talk across there. So It's bridging VXLAN networks inside switches to the VXLAN networks inside OpenStack and doing it over the 100 gig capacity. So this is like a in progress experimenting thing, but it's definitely like, I think, a use case that's going to start appearing more and more and more as we get more VXLAN users out there, I think.
Mohammed, in this case, are you doing SRV with those ports as well?
We haven't gotten that far yet. The hardware is still making its way here because these servers have a huge backload on them. But the plan is to kind of experiment and see how far we can push these things. I'm not sure though if we can still do SROV and VXLAN.
We're doing it, so the answer is yes.
Oh, that's very helpful. And I guess, but then I think you lose the security groups and all the other stuff that comes along with that.
Beth, is that with the OVS offload into the ConnectX NIC? Or was that some other vendor?
It's another method.
Okay.
I think you can retain the security groups if you use the OVS offloads. VXLAN encapsulation is slightly different, but the tricky stuff with the Mellanox, the real voodoo, is the ASAP squared OVS offloads in hardware. I've not heard of that used in a bare metal context, though. We've used it in virtualized environments to reasonably good effect. I think in a bare metal network, people often think about smart NICs for providing security groups and generally sort of out-of-band monitoring from the network side. And it'd be interesting to hear if people have experience of that.
For lack of a better term, a poor man's Azure SmartNIC, like the ones that they had kind of documented, which I think they talked about how they work for them.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. To be able to actually have some firewall rules injected from the control plane side into the NIC, rather than entirely trust the tenant and the bare metal network.
It's an interesting way to do it.
There's definitely been some discussion in the community of people doing that. The thing with smart NICs that always scared me is that just the fact that many smart NICs are designed so that the OS can override the NIC configuration. So at some point, your machine becomes your security vulnerability in those cases.
I mean, I think it's an interesting idea. I just kind of, it's a little early, and I think no one's kind of figured out how to do this just right. And it's like, okay, well, what about security patching of all these smart NICs, and how do you make sure no one actually flashes the firmware on that smart NIC and changes it to start trunking like all the VLANs or whatever into that physical host or things like that.
I have this suspicion that it's going to be like the BMC network switches and access, that once the next generation of thing comes out, then they'll be downgraded to the or be used in the farms for bare metal servers for people to use, because we'll be on something new with the virtual machine infrastructure where we do absolutely need every ounce of performance gain for that traffic.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, we're certainly looking into various different types of smart NICs, but it's not like in production yet. But how to build the infrastructure really? All the discussion items just mentioned, do we start with just the simple smart NIC functionality, so to say, that provides SIOB-like performance and some additional features like bonding and so on? Going from there to how is the control plane? Where's the control plane of the smart NIC located? Is it just an obvious offload, or is it just or is it a separate control plane, as just mentioned? And for instance, we anyway do have like a software-defined infrastructure management layer included that would be the component, for instance, to program functionality of an advanced smart NIC that would provide isolation, for instance, between tenants, not just in a virtualized environment, but also when running Kubernetes, for instance, on bare metal. Then if you need to, or if you would like to create some kind of multi-tenant isolation on the host, that would be an interesting approach to do that. And yeah, so a couple of things ongoing in that area, really. So we have a couple of prototyping things going on.
So I think we've had some really good discussion on the server physical connectivity side of things. It's probably a good point to move on to other topics. So next up, we've got logical connectivity, and I suppose this is how your machines are connected up to a logical network, whether that's a VLAN, VXLAN, or a flat network, whether they're given routed access to a network via BGP or something like that, as Mohammed mentioned earlier. And I think an interesting question on this topic is IPv6. That old, it's always there in the background looming. You're either doing it and complaining that why isn't everyone doing this, or you're scared to try, or perhaps somewhere in the middle. But has anyone tried this with bare metal and found that there are problems? I guess with Ironic or with other tools.
I mean, I haven't as much as on bare metal. I guess the interesting thing here is for like doing things like pixie booting and all that other stuff. I think that's where it can get really tricky. And especially as some of the users that were here yesterday were talking about the fact that like sometimes you just have older hardware and there's just like, you're not going to get IPv6 on that anytime soon. So I think that's the tricky part on the bare metal side.
The other tricky part is a number of vendors have chosen not to implement v6 in BIOS firmware, only in UEFI firmware because it has a unified networking stack. So that makes it very easy for them to just adopt that code and the NICs work. The major difference also between the two is PXE operations for IPv4 had lots of different fields that were required, and the mechanics are drastically different for PXE operations with v6, where it's one field. But you have to take multiple steps to get to that field.
So I see an interesting comment from China Mobile. From 2019, new projects are only allowed to use IPv6. I'm sure you've got some interesting stories about things that got in your way and seemed like you couldn't solve them, or were there any interesting problems that you had to fix to get to that point? Is anyone from China Mobile still on the audio?
Yes, my friend, but he didn't. Maybe the problem with the voice unmute. He didn't unmute it.
Okay.
No, we really work hard, but no, he has babies.
Is anyone else being restricted to IPv6 only?
No, we're not, but you know, we want it, we use it internally, but most of our customers are having, you know, they're not using it. And they're whine when they ask for IP addresses and we can't give them to them.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
We pushed a lot for continuing to do it. Our biggest challenge is a lot of the access to our systems is we do a lot of like zero trust off, and so we don't really use like to use VPNs for much. But now the struggle is because we're mostly remote, not everybody has access to IPv6, and so they end up having to get like a tunnel up somewhere just to get IPv6 connectivity to access systems, which starts to kind of get a little frustrating. And so that's one of the things that we found kind of annoying and difficult. Also, we found that it's really important to have really, really good DNS infrastructure if you're going to do IPv6, because you're not going to be remembering those IP addresses at all. And so that's one of those things we had to kind of improve and make sure we have good DNS infrastructure.
And I mean, we're telecom, so we're doing a whole lot of our management networks is over the MPLS infrastructure. So, but not everybody can do that, obviously.
Is anyone using VXLAN with bare metal? I mean, by that I mean actually not for spanning between switches, but actually connecting the machines to VXLAN networks.
I would say that I would love to but I feel like there's a bit of challenge. I feel like if you wanted to do that, you would have to use, not obviously 100% have to use smart NICs to do something like that. And I don't know if it's possible without any smart NICs at all, because you kind of have to out of band configure the switch port on the system.
Yeah, so you'd have to configure the port on the switch as a VXLAN terminated endpoint.
Yeah. I guess I kind of have this assumption that I can never have any access to any of the systems that we run, and maybe that's an incorrect assumption that not everybody has to deal with, because we can't go inside any of the systems, and we have to kind of assume that we don't ever have access, and that's makes things a bit harder.
Yeah, I think we'll come to that later. That question of whether you get dynamic access to configure the network when machines are provisioned or not. So I think that we're often talking about different things there.
I was going to say the only VXLAN use in bare metal I've seen is kind of what you alluded to with the VXLAN between the switches. So the switch has a concept of a VLAN in it that you attach to, but that turns out to be a VXLAN within the fabric. But yeah, like you say, that's probably best discussed in the dynamic switch config topic.
Okay, might be a good time to end the poll and take a look at the results. No huge surprise to see 10 gig out in front. 25 gig, second place, which is, yeah, it does seem quite popular at the moment. Still some people with 1 gig.
Yeah, and also I've noticed 40 gig had 0 votes, and I've known a number of people that have built infrastructures where they've automated the bare metal but have 40 gig NICs and they're using them. So it seems a little weird. I guess maybe
Oh.
it's only certain groups of deployments if people are doing that.
Well, I could add some color on that because that had to do with when the 40 gigs came out, that the 100 gigs came out pretty shortly afterward. And there was a slight cost difference, but not a huge one. So we ended up having very little 40 gig because we just jumped from 10 to 100. So that may account for why there's some out there. Certainly we have some, but mostly we just said, yeah, to hell with it, we'll just go to the hundreds. Because I think there was only like a 6-month or a year difference between when the 40s came out and when the hundreds followed. And I couldn't answer the poll, but we have a lot of 1 gig out at the edge. So that I would say at the edge condition, it's going to be mostly 1 gigs.
Is that a cost thing or just the link to it's so small that you may as well use 1 gig anyway?
Yeah, it has to do with the link. We do have customers asking for 10, but they're usually in a data center. So, but yeah, for the most part, out at the it's if the connections are only 100 meg, there's no point in putting in a 10 gig NIC in there.
Cool, that makes total sense.
So I'm aware we're getting through the time, and we've got 25 minutes left in this session. Still quite a few topics to cover, so maybe we should cherry pick something rather than going through. Is there anything in this list that anyone would like to talk about in particular?
Tempted to jump to that dynamic networking configuration thing because it came up.
Yeah, so that's line 229.
Yeah.
I think that's a good topic. So I suppose I tend to mentally separate network configuration into two aspects, one of which you may not do, but the first is your kind of mostly static network configuration that gets applied to a network, and it may change, but it changes slowly. And then dynamic network configuration, I'm thinking here of how edge ports are configured during machine provisioning and when machines are attached to a network. And typically this is used for multi-tenant networking, or giving users access to bare metal machines in a multi-tenant fashion. But that's not necessarily the only use case for it, but I guess that's the most common. So just contrasting those two types of network configuration, I guess, does anyone think about this differently, or have I got that wrong? But also, how many people are actually doing this dynamic network configuration? Is your network static when you attach machines to it, or do you allow your provisioning system to control the network?
We rely on networking generic switch, which works really nicely, and it's nice that it can be expanded very easily to accommodate other systems. And I also like the fact that it's non-vendor specific, so I don't have to worry about vendor X not being up to date on the day that a new OpenStack release is out because they've decided that they prioritize something else for that month. So we rely on that to do all the VLAN configurations on the physical switches, and that's kind of it on our side.
I know some users of hyperconverged hardware solutions where there are virtual NICs that the backplane's supplying do end up needing to use some sort of ML2 driver. I'm just not aware or popular that is at this point.
And our environment doesn't do any dynamic network configuration. It's just there's a whole other system that the network team is built to manage switches. And one of the main issues for us originally started with our larger layer 2 networks, where if we went and started, say, trunking a VLAN down to a given switch and setting that on a port in a large layer 2 network, there would be some spanning tree problems. Then layer 3, it's kind of the same deal. We have a very large, even a layer 3 network. If we add a new subnet to a top of rack switch, that is like a routing topology change across the whole network core. And so there's a lot of risks that come with that. So those we only add during maintenance windows.
So does that mean that you only provision machines during maintenance windows?
No, we provision. That's a good question. No, we provision machines all the time. But again, a layer 3 network, we can, since we have a subnet pre-allocated to a top of rack switch, what we do for our bare metal provisioning stuff is we've actually pre-assigned an IP address, at least one IP address to every bare metal machine. And then we have a pool in each rack. We do maintain a reserve pool of additional IPs for hosts that need to have more than one IP address. And so basically we do that ahead of time so that we don't have to make any changes to we don't have to make any network routing changes whenever we go to provision a host. It also means that for bare metal, like at our scale, practically speaking right now, something like a separate provisioning network is not possible.
So I guess that means your network setup is pretty static, and that a machine is tied to an IP. It can't suddenly move to a different logical network.
Yeah, eventually we may be able to do something like move it to a different network, but that's only if we've already allocated that separate network in that rack. And there's, even in like a layer 3 like leaf and spine network, there's still a limited number of subnets that you can allocate to a given rack. And so really it's like you can do it, you just have to know ahead of time that you need the extra subnet associated with that rack. You can't do it, you can't add that subnet to that rack like in that moment. And then for VMs, it's similar. We just have a guest subnet associated with each rack, and then the hypervisors are aware of that for that rack.
I think I heard someone trying to speak. Was it John?
I was going to ask a question, but James answered it. I was wondering if you could have multiple subnets on the switch for multiple networks pre-statically assigned, but I guess as you say, it uses IP space, I guess. But you could if you needed it.
Yeah.
It sounded like it. Which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So I'm fairly familiar with how Ironic does this dynamic network configuration. And I imagine quite a few people here are as well. I'd be interested to hear from other projects that we have represented here about how they do this. I know we've heard from Rob Hirschfield. Perhaps you could talk about digital rebar and how it supports dynamic network config. Maybe he's not on the call anymore.
Yeah, I think they might have dropped out. I don't see the name when searching for it.
Is there anyone else that allows Ironic or some other provisioning system to manage their network in any way?
I could talk a bit about the scaling issues we've been seeing.
With Neutron specifically?
Yeah. Well, though, to be fair, not necessarily just Neutron. Yeah, this is more the Ironic and Neutron. So one of the cases we've got is effectively that you want to kind of re-image the whole rack because of a kernel update in a big cluster. So you kind of get the worst case bunching. And I said, isn't it cool how these switches have got more dense? But it actually means we've actually got more conflicting for the dynamic networking, of course, because there's actually a lot more ports on there now because of the breakout cables, which is joyous. So yeah, network engineering switch is started using twos, right, for the locking, so you can kind of limit the concurrency between. So there's the basic thing of if you have too many SSH connections going into the switch starts worrying. Well, switches no, right? And you get timeouts as well. So you do have to tweak your timeout so that the port binding request can take a while. But I was wondering if other people are seeing this and have had ways around it.
So the funny thing is that we actually see this same sort of issue in CI for Ironic today. And the issue basically is that Neutron can take a little while to bind ports. And if you bump the timeout that we just by default wait, you kind of avoid it and you don't see it. But ultimately the solution is to support callbacks from Neutron and or have a non-Neutron driver, network driver doing the port orchestration, which is something I would love to see. Just I've not been able to build critical mass around building another networking driver.
Yeah.
I mean, and mainly just from mainly my thought was around that was just let's maybe approach it from we're just doing this physical fabric configuration. We don't need IP addressing kind of thing, but
I guess someone has to do that, but yeah, I see your point.
Yeah, there's a couple different things that happens in Neutron that I'm not a Neutron expert, so I can't really explain, but basically it's requests sometimes get delayed in variable amount of time.
So in the virtualization case, it is an awful lot quicker because it's Nova has like the callback mechanism with Neutron already. So it's not until the agent on the actual hypervisor does the binding, it then calls back and Nova waits for it, and then that all works through. But I guess all the current drivers are using a top level plugin rather than the ML2 agent as such.
Basically, yes. The mechanics are that Neutron does currently have the ability to do the callback when binding is done. It's just right now we don't process the callback or really know what to do with it in Ironic to be able to say, oh, we can proceed, we're done, or we can power the machine on. And that's kind of the missing piece at this point.
Okay. Maybe no one else is having this problem.
As I said, I see it in CI at least a couple times a week. But CI is also, we're basically dealing with a number of potential race conditions because we're on hardware with variable performance. across many, many different clouds. So it forces us to be a little more robust, and it does cause us to hit cases we wouldn't normally hit in a production environment.
Yeah, that's true. The level of contention in CI is kind of cool at shaking out the bugs for sure. I mean, I think we've typically been making timeouts the order of about 5 minutes ish for the port binding request. But yeah, it depends on the switch density.
Is that inside Ironic?
Inside Ironic and HA proxy actually.
Wow.
So you have to let it's a single HTTP connection.
Yeah,
that's not always long enough.
Unfortunately, that's definitely an area where it'd be useful to build some consensus around trying to fix that. If people want to put their names on a list, then maybe we can build an effort.
That sounds like an idea.
Is there anyone from China Mobile available to talk about this comment on line 224?
Oh, yes. My colleague is here, and this is Zixiang from China Mobile. I tried to connect my colleague, Yan Han. He's online. Yeah. Hi, Han.
Hi, Han. We could hear you.
Let's see if
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, hello.
Hello, I come from China Mobile. I'm Xiao Guang. For the automation, for the network automation, I will give you some introduction about the China Mobile's practice. Now we do some network configuration, initial configuration for our network device. That means in our hardware integration period, we will do such kind of work. Because our scale is large, so we found many manually configuration mistakes in previous project. And so we decided to use our own automation tools to do some initial network device configuration. Our solution is that we use our automation tools to connect to our EOR management EOR, and all the TOR switches and the UR switches will be DCP client enabled in the vendor factory. So when it ships to the on-site, our automation tools will provide the DHCP server and array some IP address to the EOR TOR switches. And after that, our automation tools will log in every EOR or TOR and do some initial configuration for network device. This is our solution for initial network configuration.
How do you configure the switch ports appropriately? Are all of your switch ports configured in the same way, or do you have to have some discovery that determines which port has which role and therefore must be configured in a particular way?
Because we have some low-level derived data for every switch. For example, how to configure EOR switch or the TOR switch. We have the derived data. So when we log in every switches, we may do some comparison according to our low-level derived. for every port. For example, some VLAN information as TP, LLDP, such kind of comparison.
That's using LLDP, is it?
Yes, we will enable LDP for the switch because we will use LDP protocol to do some cable connectivity inspection.
Yeah,
Of
we
course,
will check
for
the connection.
of course, for our servers, we still ask our vendor to provide our servers with the NIC port support LDP protocol, so that we can do some cabling connectivity between the server and the TOR switches.
Do you have any way to verify that the servers are connected up as you would expect them to be?
Pardon?
Yes, we have. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess he asked the question is if how can we know the server is up?
Yes, we have. First, we should push OS means on the server's RAM, and the servers will up. Then will then in the OS we will enable the LLDP so that we can do this verification. But we have another solutions, which means we can do the connectivity verification. No need OS. That means we ask Intel and Mellanox. They will provide they provide.
I think we just lost audio from them.
Yeah, let's see if they come back. Does anyone else have any?
Hello, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Oh, okay. Sorry, my phone just now has some problem. Yeah.
That's okay.
Here I will add comments for the network automation.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any particular tricks that they use for discovering the topology of the network and validating that it meets their expectations?
It's hard to say that it's a trick. There's typically in the infrastructure that we sell from our side, there's a proprietary component to that. Infrastructure manager and infrastructure kind of goes into the direction of an SDN controller also for controlling the fabric. I'm wondering if that really is static or dynamic, but typically it provides functionality just like you have. Well, it would provide functionalities to slice up your hardware into multiple separate resource domains, so to say. So this infrastructure manager, first of all, of course, it discovers everything you have, including the network fabric and components there. And then depending on configuration, mainly done manually right now, on the way to be automated more. It basically slices up the network by configuring the fabric correspondingly to what you'd like to have, like connectivity between different blades in your system and so on, including the switches. Yeah, that's since this is mainly like a fully proprietary thing, this, that's just basically what we use right now. It's not much, I'd say, connection to an open source piece of software in there.
So we're getting pretty close to the end, but maybe just to finish on a slightly more exotic topic. Does anyone use any non-Ethernet networking? I'm thinking InfiniBand.
I do know people have deployed clusters using that exclusively. I don't think they're on, and I think they're in a time zone that, or at least the one person that I could probably call on if they were here, they're in a time zone where this doesn't work for them.
Is that Jacob Anders?
It is, actually. But I remember when I was at HP years ago, we had a number of folks doing InfiniBand.
This is line 204.
I'm curious, you said +1 for OmniPath.
It's me, Gunthor. We use OmniPath fabrics.
So how is that integrated with you dynamically configuring OmniPath?
We are doing it dynamically. So current implementation is basically taking the configuration of the switch port of the ironic nodes and applying that to the vFabric. So it's kind of doing a one-to-one mapping. But we have been, testing the new drivers from Intel, which are basically its own separate ML2 driver for OmniPath.
Is that the networking OmniPath driver?
Yeah. But basically in production, we are doing this kind of one-to-one mapping, creating vFabrics based on the ports as they are defined by the network generic switch.
Is that giving you different partitions for different users?
Yeah, basically.
And does it work well?
Yeah.
I did want to test that out, but the customers moved to InfiniBand.
Makes sense.
It's a shame it actually looked the way it was described, how networking OmniPath worked, looked quite neat compared to the InfiniBand partitioning. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Is anyone doing partitioning with InfiniBand? Or dynamic management with partitions, at least?
Well, Jacob was, or did.
Yeah, I think he was booting over InfiniBand, wasn't he?
He was. I think I guess he was setting the machines to a specific partition and then doing network booting inside that partition, like one does with the provisioning network.
Yeah. So we've done it before, but always with an Ethernet network as well, and just use Ethernet for provisioning. Well, I think we're.
I was going to say there are some other folks that do it because occasionally they come in saying, hey, this isn't working as we expected, but it's definitely a more exotic technology than Ethernet, so people don't tend to use it as much.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Just to be clear with our usage only, but so we basically use it for compute only. So we are not using it for provisioning at all. We are using Ethernet completely for provisioning and general networking.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time. But like Ashley's going to say the same.
Well, I hate to cut off a great conversation, but yeah, let's take a quick break and jump back in about 6 or 8 minutes. So we'll see everybody back here at, well, it's 9:35 my time, but 35 past the hour for everybody else. All right, welcome back. We are going to now jump into networking once again, focusing on networking security this time, and I'm going to turn it over to Ian Joliffe to lead this discussion.
Great, thanks, Ashley. Hopefully my audio is working okay and everybody can hear me. Welcome to the networking security discussion this morning. Really happy to be here, see a lot of people I do know, a lot of new names and people I'm looking forward to getting to know this morning. Welcome everybody from good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. You know, certainly a very diverse and talented group of people on the call today. You know, I did prepare a little bit of an introduction here to try and get the conversation going, and there's been some other good contributions on the Etherpad already. So, you know, I tend to, what I thought I would do is start by the introduction, and then we can jump around the Etherpad as the conversation evolves this morning. So, you know, if we really think about the theme that the foundation is set up as part of OpenDev, we're really continuing the theme of automation in this session, but really with a focus on networking security and how it relates to hardware and automation. So those are the kinds of topics that I'm looking to draw out of the conversation today. You know, how do we expose new challenges and new learnings and new opportunities for the community as we move some of the things that used to be driven in, you know, proprietary boxes, but now those same policies and security capabilities need to be part of open source projects. So I think that's a very interesting area that we need to evolve. Also, you know, how do we ensure what we deploy on day zero remains aligned with the security policies of the enterprise from day one to day X? I think that's a very interesting challenge, and I know one that many companies struggle with today. And, you know, another interesting angle I thought we could explore is in a increasingly DevOps world, how do we operationalize the workflow from the developer through to operations and making sure that the networking security remains comprehensive across the network and aligned with policies. So those were my opening remarks. Certainly, if there's other topics that people want to double click on, and please add them to the Etherpad. Again, I've got a separate window here going on my computer so that I can scroll down the Etherpad. I will also call out line items to keep us aligned on where we are in the conversation. And if we get some controversy or good debate going, maybe we'll even throw in a poll to see how we can draw everybody into the conversation and have an opportunity to contribute what they're seeing in the trends in the industry as well. So with that, you know, let's start at line 293. What are some of the automation tools that people are using for network security, and then more specifically for port configuring and filtering?
Do you mean port in like networking fabric, or do you mean port as in virtual port?
Well, I think, yeah, I think that's a great question. So, you know, it could be the physical port, it could be the virtual ports. You know, maybe let's start with what are some of the higher level tools that people are using for security in a networking context.
We have a ton of automation with this stuff, but it's all some custom internal tooling.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I was going to say, I've seen a certain trend for people, I hate using a buzzword, but like the zero trust kind of model.
Right.
Where they kind of assume outside the box there be dragons, basically, and then try and secure everything as if it were on the public internet directly, effectively.
Right.
Using tooling that deals with that. Which is convenient for the case that I wrote on 301, where I'm using ironic driver that doesn't do any security as such, beyond VLAN segregation.
Great. Thanks, John.
Is it, but John, is it the port doesn't, I mean, the driver doesn't know how to convey the security group to the switch port?
I think there's two parts of it. Yes, and there's enough complexity there. I'm not sure I want to look at that. But yeah, I think that's fair. I suppose it could do switch ACLs and everything else, but which I'm guessing is what James was saying that his internal tooling deals with, presumably.
Some of it, yeah. In fact, something I was going to volunteer because I was just thinking about this. We've done something where my team has built some automation that basically is synchronizing neutron security groups from one of our new environments to our internal centralized network ACL system. And the cool thing about that is it gives our network security paranoids like a single place to look to see our overall global network posture. Like we're not creating like a weird little extra thing. But the other cool thing is by doing that, the way that my team did it is that they implement it in such a way that then you can go in and you could look at that neutron security group and you could actually say, you know what, this is actually something I need also applied to a physical firewall to say allow ingress into like some of our legacy networks. So this way, if you need to talk to bare metal machines in our older production environment or our classic or heritage class or provision bare metal environment, you could go to this system and say, oh, you know, allow egress from this cloud environment managed with OpenStack and Neutron, allow that to egress, and then also it applies an ingress rule on the bare metal side to production if you've configured that, or however you've configured your security group rule. So it's like an interesting way of binding kind of the old world and the new world that ties in with the host-based ACL system we have for some bare metal stuff for our bare metal machines, and kind of bringing those two environments together and making sure that our network or security folks have a place to look to kind of understand what are all the traffic flows between our old world or our old stuff and our new stuff. I'll type something on the Etherpad to that effect.
I tried to capture a little bit there, James, but you know, feel free to fix it up there.
Will do, yeah.
It kind of makes me wonder if, because you said that you spoke of your security folks as a completely separate group. And I'm guessing that's probably fairly typical in large organizations with regulatory compliance and separation of duties. So I'm wondering, you know, how does one also, and this is probably another topic that we can come back to later, but how does one actually bridge that divide where there needs to be some ownership or some collaboration there, but it starts getting weird because you also need to automate it?
Yeah, that's I feel like I have a lot of opinions on that subject, but I will say that I think the model of having a separate security group that and then partner with them closely is something that I think is actually working well for us. It depends on, like, I think a business being willing to fund and support that security group, because I feel like that's something I've seen in a variety of businesses is where they hire the security folks, but they don't empower them to actually drive positive change in the infrastructure.
Right. No, I've seen the same thing as well, James. Yeah. maybe that's where automation fits in, right? Is, that investment needs to be tied into automation versus, a security team that is more ivory tower-ish or something like that. And that needs to be part of the end-to-end story.
And also the fiscal budget, so that it's conveyed to senior management in some way that makes dollars and cents to them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the most important things is making sure that the senior management understands and buys into the importance of security as an empowered entity within the business. It's and part of that, I think, something that our security folks have started doing is they run classes every year to help teach engineers how to think about security as a default, like how to think about designing secure applications, and they, so secure application design, kind of thinking about like how your architecture works. And then we also have things like red teams who are able to help test applications and actually from an attacker's perspective, as well as things like fire or incident response teams who are able to respond to anything if there is any kind of detected intrusion attempt.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'll move down. Oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I like what you said there about the education and moving it into the development cycle, as in further back with the security thing. That seems to be a thing I'm seeing a lot of people do better at. And I think it's interesting that a lot of people are using security as an excuse to adopt like DevOps style automation. Reason. It's just because you can you start to get more of a change audit trail. And you can sort of prove that there's been peer review of the changes that you've made and that kind of process side. That seems to be a big deal. And I guess I should say that using things like Ironic kind of is a good enabler in that sense, because your hardware deployment starts to use all the same tooling that you can do on the VMs as well, which is kind of cool.
Absolutely.
The idea is to have that layer of isolation, that layer of access control, so that you can ultimately journal those changes and track it. I think one of the conundrums when we start talking about automating all these things is, and it kind of goes to the some organizations create security groups but then don't empower them, is they also want to automate all these things, except you have other teams that tend not to want those things automated, or that want to maintain the spreadsheet process of approval, or the you may only change switch configuration at 3 a.m. on Tuesdays kind of rules. And at some point, it's adherence to the way things have been done for that reason does not make any sense. And it's kind of how to break that mindset and how to embrace that automation to improve your standpoint, how your posture and your standpoint within your infrastructure.
I think what you're saying, Julia, is part of this is not just a technological change, but a bit of a cultural change within companies and how they operate.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. Something I kind of want to plug my team here, because something that makes me really proud is when my team actually finds a security problem and they work with the Paranoid team and file a security bug against ourselves. So they notify the team, they notify our paranoids, the paranoids help us track it through. That actually really helps us build a much better relationship with the paranoids, which, by the way, that's the name of our internal security organization, which I love.
I thought you were making that up, but no, that's excellent.
Yeah, they're called the paranoids, and traditionally throughout the organization, they've been separate, and they report higher up in the or they report to a different part of the vertical. And the nice thing is that it makes it so that they actually do have a lot of ability to impact change on the business, right? So if they file a security bug, it's something that has to be remediated. And if you fail to remediate that, that's something that there's a timeline, which are usually shorter than we would prefer, which is fair, that you can't actually go beyond that. You know, once you exceed that, that's something that's tracked up at the senior executive level, and getting an exception for that is actually a pretty big process to get an exception to try and get out of a security bug. And some of these things, it's like, look, this is a reasonable thing. We know that this is a bug. So you have the discussion, you work with the business, they agree that this is an exception. So seeing my team looking for and detecting security problems and actually proactively notifying our security partners and sort of holding ourselves accountable, whenever I see that, that always makes me smile, because that shows that my team is really committed to security and protecting the business and our users.
That is awesome. I know from my own personal experience that just having those discussions with the security folks builds a lot more trust and a better dialogue, and even helps spawn some collaboration or even consultation, because they're not the subject matter experts on everything. They know, they have their mindset, they have their focus areas, and so they may end up reaching out going, hey, I've got this problem, I need to solve it, help, or what do you think about this? And that just makes a better culture at that point.
Absolutely. All right, well, maybe let's move to line 338 and talk about security monitoring. And we've talked a little bit about some of the tools and processes, but one aspect of networking security is, monitoring what's happening in your network. Do people have a few thoughts on that side of it? Either open source challenges or other partnerships that people would be comfortable sharing? Okay, we got somebody putting something in at 321, so let's maybe go there. I think monitoring, detection, reporting of cloud network controllers. Yeah, so this is very much in the same vein. So I haven't heard of Wazoo, I guess it is, before, but that sounds, it's a great name, but could somebody share a little bit about that tool, whoever wrote that?
Well, I put that in. We're seeing some of our customers starting to use this, although as I understood it, I was more hoping someone else would tell me it does the network for me. It's more to do with the endpoints. It came up in the security SIG in one of a previous event, and I kind of thought nothing of it. And then several customers have started mentioning it also. So it seems to be gaining traction, at least.
Okay, cool.
Which is interesting. And I think it was more that it gives you a set of compliance rules to start with that you can point at that you're following rather than building your own, which seems quite attractive in terms of there's a community building them together. But I was curious if there's anything from the more networking point of view in a similar vein.
I guess one question I had on this vein is, are people using more and more SIEM techniques to monitor their networks and overlays, and are they monitoring network for IDS kind of scenarios? That's certainly something that I would expect to hear.
Yeah, I know some people that do like port link state monitoring with the logging data that comes off their infrastructure. So if they see a port go up or down unexpectedly outside of maintenance window, they tend to start raising alarms and starting investigations. At least as long as it's not a server workload that's a known entity.
Right.
And I think that's probably a thing that gets often overlooked, because that's, even if you have like a store and you have a switch, you can't completely secure that. And what if someone goes and walks and plugs in a Raspberry Pi on a giant battery pack? and kind of scrolls it behind the cabling. Someone may not see that for 6 months.
Right.
Or even worse, a passive tap or some sort of specialized 3-port switch.
Okay.
I guess I know some people are doing kind of the same thing with detecting malicious traffic patterns, where the software that they have, if it detects something, and they start going and investigating it from at least the logging data. I think that really comes down to processes and each individual infrastructure's configuration and layout. I'd love to hear of other people doing things along those lines, or what something like this looks like for them, because everyone's doing these things differently, and without really finding those commonalities, it's really hard to try and drive automation and improvement that everyone can take advantage of.
Has anybody heard of any AI or ML approaches to these kinds of problems? Because it sort of fits that common pattern of, you know, known traffic types. And there's the traditional DDoS protection and intrusion detection approaches as well. So maybe trying to get back to the theme of automation, wondering, you know, how security is interesting, because it started with, you know, I forget who said it, but somebody said, you know, everything's defined in a spreadsheet and needs to be checked. And, you know, the spreadsheet then needs to be approved before anything changes. You know, what are some of the things that we think we need to do to sort of automate those spreadsheets from a technology point of view, and you know, try and enable that transition to a more automated approach to networking security? And where would we start? I guess if we had the challenge in front of us, where would we start?
I've got some ideas, but I want to hear if anyone else does first.
Right, so I have a partial meta comment, which sounds like a stupid thing to say, which is more to do with the lines of responsibilities, which is a bit like what we were saying about the team segregation. So I think we're finding with a lot of customers, they don't necessarily, they're a tenant of a provided edge network link. So actually there's a lot of communication between some other team on what's allowed through there. So like when we're talking about some of the, which is in a sense that some people are consuming as a service, the understanding that there is port scanning going on the network, and, you know, DDoS protections and things outside in the ether between where they happen to be running their cloud. And I suppose the additional thing is we've also seen issues where we're working with a customer that's building like a scientific federation of different clouds in different data centers with different operators. The differences between sites gets really interesting, because in some sites, all your floating IPs are firewalled by default. So it's kind of almost useless until you go and talk to someone. Whereas other sites, they're fairly open until you get told that you're doing something bad by some overarching lord in the distance. There's an automation machine. I'm being slightly flippant, but you know what I mean. So I guess when it comes to automating a firewall conversation, it's kind of, yeah, not having to pick up the phone and talk to someone or raise a ticket sounds really cool.
Oh, it's a good comment.
Yeah, it's actually a great observation in my mind, because you're right in that you generally want to avoid that phone call, and depending on how the infrastructure has been set up and how people are operating, and I guess, the original control points that people decided to establish, you end up with these processes, procedures that kind of reflect all of that and have cascaded into the current day, which adds more control points and more processes.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe the key is to kind of unwind the control points, go back to what the original meaning was in those cases, and try and establish a common set that can be worked through and supported.
Yeah, I think I've seen some people do this in by effect almost building two clouds. So you have one that you basically have a part of your cloud which is effectively almost in the DMZ. That has, maybe not the DMZ, I'm probably using the wrong term. It's almost outside, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And another part of the cloud which is considered inside. So they actually partition their workloads between which networks they can live in based on how much, where they are in the network security hierarchy, if you see what I mean. So for the most sensitive workloads, they're more behind a firewall, if that makes sense. So it sort of depends.
I guess maybe I'll throw out a controversial comment just to try and further the discussion. I guess, you know, many organizations could have various control points. So, you know, if we were to try and identify a network security open source project, you know, how would we come up with, you know, a significantly common set of things that we would want to go after? And, you know, that I think that's particularly interesting, is, you know, there's got to be common pain points. You know, there's a few other folks from China Mobile on here. Maybe they have a perspective. Maybe there's other folks that want to weigh in from an operator perspective as well.
Sorry, because now we come from China Mobile's hardware integration team. So we are not familiar with some operation perspective about the security. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. No problem at all. Okay. No, I heard.
Let's see you again. Yeah. Okay.
No, it's very good. I heard some great comments from China Mobile in the previous session. So I thought I'd reach out to you guys to see if there were some thoughts here. Okay. So no problem at all. That's great.
Okay, but we will learn something about the security, and maybe offline we will contact with our security team to get some information, or ask them to connect with you or other guys to review our Etherpad information. If they want to do some discussion with you, I think we can talk about it offline. Thank you.
Oh, great. That's super. Thank you. I guess maybe let's maybe try and dive deeper into, you know, some more tactical approaches here. You know, there were a few things on the Etherpad when I started adding to it, so I wanted to make sure we address those. So let's maybe talk about automated firewall configuration at a more detailed technical level, starting at line 339. And I'm more familiar with manual ways of firewall configuration, so I can't really offer anything on the automated side, but hopefully others can talk through that.
Does anyone use the Neutron firewall as a service thing? That was a sort of related question.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Maybe that's a no.
Maybe
someone would tell me if it's good.
It might just be, it's no for this audience.
That's what I mean, yeah.
All right. Just scrolling up a bit. So let's maybe move on to row 346. Anyone removing edit access to security groups from the OpenStack project admins?
So maybe I can fill in some background on the use case. So at CERN, we have some internal firewalls to segregate off areas like the cryogenics control and beam steering systems. And we're hitting some scalability problems there with the appliances that we've got. And one of the ideas was that we could use security groups, but the project admins themselves should not be allowed to edit them. Only the security team should be allowed to. I don't know if anyone else has things like that, default security groups that cannot be removed from a project.
We've certainly worked with someone that has basically tried to, it creates a custom policy file. So you can have a role that only has access to do the security group stuff, and then basically run that through automation. So the automation bot is the only thing with that rule, apart from like a break glass kind of idea where you just, the admin obviously could assign that role to themselves, but that would be against policy.
Okay, that sounds doable. So basically use the policies framework to then allocate that, remove that right from a project admin. Yes, effectively. Yeah, it was effectively that. It wasn't so bad in, I was trying to think if there's any gotchas when we were trying that. I think it's not too bad actually in the neutron policy file for that particular rule. Great, sounds like to do it. The nice thing now, of course, with policy in code is that you only need to have the overrides in your policy file rather than the whole policy file. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good lead into some of the challenges of managing networking security at scale. You know, the problem becomes much more challenging, you know, than if you're using a very small installation or a multi-site, multi-region kind of installation. Maybe we should double click on some of those challenges. And I think somebody also mentioned, you know, some of the variability in policy between sites as well can cause issues.
It almost feels like if it's going back to the prior discussion, prior topic, it feels like there's an opportunity for an enhancement, because it seems like you'd want your admins to be able to control certain groups and still be able to isolate them from the normal admins. And it feels like it's by changing the policy file, you're making an all or nothing configuration change.
So you mean having something like system rules and project rules?
I think so. Yeah, maybe. Mm-hmm. Or maybe this is operationally immutable, or
tenant rules.
Yeah.
We have tenants, and that's actually a problem.
I'm assuming your tenants need to be able to have some control over access and security groups, right?
That's exactly my point.
Yeah.
We need to, but obviously we don't. I actually had a big argument with one of our security engineers who was testing out the system, and he was like, well, the tenants can break out of their VM and possibly get into our private backend systems. And I said, okay, well, here's the test that you're going to do. You're going to stand up a VM, you're going to open it up wide and try to break through and see what happens. But it took me 2 weeks to convince him to do this test, which, by the way, the system passed, thank God.
Maybe you should check, Julia, you were describing So you're basically saying that there's some projects that would be locked down, but admin would still be able to change it in other projects? Was that what you were saying? Oh, I think you muted. Sorry.
Sorry. Maybe I'm feeling like changing the policy file is kind of like a giant hammer.
I agree with that.
It feels like there needs to be a little more granularity there to be able to lock down a group and say only this user or only these set of users can touch this thing, and somehow apply policy to that individual object.
Right, but you need some kind of federated thing that says, okay, this high level admin thing can't be touched, but except by this, special group. But then things underneath don't have to go back to that file every time. So we need a sense of delegation, right? More granularity.
I mean, so it does work. It works not as badly as it first sounds, in the sense that it is a role. So it's only users with that role that then have access to that within their project only.
Yes, that's how you would implement it.
Yeah, that's certainly how it works when you modify the policy file. So you just introduce a new custom role that those users that have extra privilege have, and then you can, if you want.
But we don't want
roles.
our tenants to even see that policy file at all.
Oh no, you don't see the policy file, I don't think. Certainly tenants don't see policy files. They're global in the config and hidden away.
That's as it should.
Which actually is a problem.
Yeah.
That's a different conversation. We never have fixed that one. So there's a thing with Horizon. You kind of sometimes have to tell Horizon your policy, otherwise it gets confused. But let's gloss over that.
All right. Well, let's maybe move forward. We've got about 15-20 minutes left. I haven't found a good poll to launch yet, but we'll see if we can get one rolling here at some point. I guess for automated security monitoring, are there tools or projects that we would want to highlight to new people in the community who are interested in networking security? Projects or things that people are find interesting in the wider ecosystem that we should pay attention to, and then are there other potentially cross-project things that we should be thinking about? So that's where I thought we could take this piece of the conversation. I know there's some very knowledgeable OpenStack people on the call here, so maybe let's start with some OpenStack specific things that we would want to highlight that people may or may not be aware of.
What line number are we on again?
Oh, I'm sorry, line 368.
All right, thank you.
So we've talked a bit about neutron security groups.
Wondering for 368 for like some of the tools, like I know there's things like CrowdStrike, Nessus. Is there anything else that anyone runs like that?
I mean, I kind of think the same tools that you would run in if you were to build a completely physical data center and hand install all the machines and manage all the networking manually, is kind of being the same thing I would use inside a cloud. Maybe with some of the approaches tuned a little bit.
Those two I've seen, I guess, some other scanning tools. There's certainly automated scanning tools that people are running, Nessus for sure. OpenSCAP is more of a host level thing, but does have some networking things if I remember correctly. I guess moving on to row 382, I'm wondering if there's automation frameworks that people are using as a foundation to build networking security policy or even audit various pieces of their network. So I'm thinking things like either Puppet or Ansible, where people could be either deploying and managing policy or again doing other things that maybe people hadn't anticipated. So wanted to throw that out there. And more, declarative approaches versus imperative.
I am aware, well, my wife does use or has been using a tool for basically more auditing and accounting purposes in her security department. I think it's a commercial tool. It's not open source.
Right.
And I think it also pulls in some of the community published data that allows them to create control points and figure out their processes as a result. I guess I'm not aware of any open source tools that are doing this.
Yeah, I would agree with you that these are done. I think a lot of what we're doing has been homegrown.
So that those kinds of data points actually point to an opportunity for a new open source project that could actually tackle this problem.
Absolutely. She just responded back with a couple of tools they're using, and one that seems to really, I keep hearing in other discussions with folks, is Splunk Phantom.
Did I capture that right, Julie?
Yeah, I think it's Splunk bought Phantom at some point, and that seems to be I keep hearing of that one all over the place these days. So there must be some popularity there in commercial software circles.
It's Phantom. I'm looking it up right now. It's Phantom. Yeah.
All right, well, maybe I'm going to put the foundation folks on the spot here, and let's maybe do a poll and see what would this, a simple yes, no, do we see, based on the conversation this morning, do we see an interesting opportunity for a new open source project that would focus on automating network security? Let's try that out, and we can maybe get a little bit of data from that as we exit this part of the session this morning. Sorry to put you guys on the spot there, but are there some instructions we want to share with the people on the call? It looks like we've got 65 people on, so that's a pretty good number of folks.
It'll just take us a couple minutes to get it loaded in.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Beyond a kind of a yes, no, would this be an interesting open source project? I guess kind of also collaborating on at least identifying a set of control points, and maybe that has to be separated by industry, because I know when you think about it, when I built data centers, a lot of my control points were derived by base industry compliance rules, and then not court orders, but client contracts and their contracts and their regulatory requirements, which required digging back a couple layers. Wow, only occasionally there was a court order involved.
Generally, you don't see court orders. Generally, you see, HIPAA, PCI, certifications and regulations?
Yeah, in my case, it was a litigation services firm, so there were court orders.
Oh, yeah, but that's unusual. Yeah.
Yeah, outside, at least outside of the litigation world.
Right. So HIPAA is regulatory. So FERPA, HIPAA, what's the bunch of federal things too.
Sarbanes-Oxley.
Yeah. Well, that I was thinking some of the we call it GCM, but it's got another name. We have internal acronyms for for these things.
There's also, I remember at some point, SSAE, I think 16 originally, was starting to head in some direction because it wanted to ensure you had certain control points, or even just a general vague idea of a control point.
But what my point is that it kind of falls into regulatory requirements, and then requirements that are driven by industry groups, PCI being the most common one that you see, but there are others. The utilities industry in particular is just totally security crazy, and the financial industry as well.
Having read some of the documentation guidelines on how to do central office grounding, I can believe it.
Yeah. Well, the truth is that our electrical grid is actually quite hackable, and they know it.
Well, thanks to the community folks. The poll is up if people haven't seen it on the Zoom browser, and sorry to interject on that good dialogue.
It looks so far
Beth
to
and
be
Julia.
Quite positive, yeah.
Yeah, pretty positive so far. All right, well, we'll let that run in the background for a couple of minutes, and we'll see how far we get, so people can chime in here. And there's some good updates going into the Etherpad here on various standards and control points that people are calling out. So that's great. Thank you for people chiming in here on the Etherpad. Are there topics people would like to cover that weren't explicitly listed on the Etherpad that haven't come up, or things that you feel like you would like to bring up that we haven't explicitly covered? We've got about 12 or 14 minutes left in this particular part of the agenda, and certainly welcome to throw it out very broadly here in terms of what people would like to cover in the last few minutes, or we can end a bit early as well.
Somebody else got GDPR. Yeah. GDPR is pretty specific. I mean, it gets down to the IP addresses. So that's always the one that throws me for a loop, because, mostly we don't necessarily capture any other information about the customer, but, I'll pretty much guarantee we know their IP addresses.
All right, and maybe we're going to end the poll here in about 30 seconds. So, we've got about 20 of the 55 people who are online who've chimed in. So thanks folks. I guess we've listed a number of control points here. Are there some that we would prioritize, or where would we focus in on this? Because that would probably be one of the things that a new project would need to look at.
They feel like someone would have to go through and create like a bit of a Venn diagram. Because there's definitely a lot of overlap in the specific areas. Like I've gone through the American Independent, basically the American Independent Accountants, Certified Public Accountants Association's SSAE process before, and it reached into basically any type of control that you could possibly have, and then as a result, an auditing report got generated by an independent auditing firm, and we could hand that to partners and customers, and they'd be assured that we have processes, but it delves so deep into systems that just like there were definitely overlaps with other areas.
Yeah. Well, so Julia, the issue is that a lot of the regulatory requirements overlap with the technical solutions, because remember, if you read HIPAA, it doesn't tell you the technical solution. It just says, and I teach security, and I always argue with my students about this, because they're always like, oh no, you have to like set the, what's the technical solution? I'm like, no, the policy is, this is the requirements of what data you need to protect, and it's up to you to figure out how to protect it.
Absolutely, and where I was thinking with like SSAE was that they have general suggestions that they publish as basic control points you should probably have, and then basic guidelines for auditors that are going through organizations' policies and procedures, things to look for, not necessarily technical solutions, but concepts, general ideas, and also warning signs, things that just you probably don't want to see.
Right. But there's no reason why the open source community can't build something to those requirements.
Oh, no, there's nothing preventing it. And you could use all open source under the hood to meet it. It's much more making sure that you have some way to address the control point that they want to see. Whatever that control point and whatever that mechanism is.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. We've closed the poll here. I'll share the results. It's overwhelmingly positive. So 80%, 85% of people are saying that this is a good area to focus a new open source project. So interesting data point for all of us who are passionate about open source. I'll put out one more call here for any other topics or areas that you would have liked to have taken the conversation that I haven't, and please chime in, and and if not, I've just got a couple of closing comments, and I see some folks writing on the Etherpad, so that's great. So I don't want to cut anybody off here.
I have a self-serving comment.
Sure.
We're actually, our internal security team, the Paranoids, they're hiring a dedicated OpenStack engineer.
Yay!
If you know anyone that's looking, this would be awesome. So I won't go on and on.
I'm so glad to hear that, James, because I have had many arguments with those guys about OpenStack.
Yeah. So this will be good.
That's great.
Probably, I don't know if I should put the link in the Etherpad, but otherwise I put it up on my Twitter. Pretty easy to find.
Okay,
there, so.
Perfect. I'm sure there's a few of us hiring in this space for sure. It's a very important space and tough to find experienced people for sure. All right, well, thank you everybody for joining. It was very enjoyable experience for me. This is the first time I've moderated a virtual session like this, so I think it's really good to double click into these kinds of topics and use the virtual tools that we have at our disposal in these challenging times. And it's always better to get together face to face, but maybe this has been a bigger opportunity for people to contribute without having to travel. So I'd like to thank the foundation for putting this together, and thank you everybody for your participation. And with that, I'll throw it back to the foundation team to move us on with the rest of the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for moderating that and driving the conversation. So we have a few minutes on the schedule to do a little bit of a wrap up and review of the just kind of the outcomes from the week. So I would love for any of the moderators, especially, to chime in. I did notice that that I had started to go through and gather some of the follow-up items, and then I think Arne had pointed out that in the bare metal SIG Etherpad, a lot of them have actually already made their way in here. So thank you, whoever was populating this. It seems like there's 5 or so that have been captured across the days. And so, you know, if Mohammed or Julia or James or Mark or Ian, if any of you have any other things that that you think are worth putting in here, or any of these that we should kind of like talk about a little more, feel free to chime in.
Okay.
Was that James going to say something, or?
Oh yeah, I was just saying, will do. I'm gonna take a look
Oh,
right now.
okay.
I think to me these are all like pretty interesting. I think they're kind of like, we mentioned on the first day about the bare metal white paper that is also on this Etherpad, and I think, you know, that's a really great overview document that has tons of information in it. Seems like there are some opportunities here to create some documentation that's more specific, and maybe, you know, especially something like the you know, now I'm not seeing it in here, but the one about kind of like the different I think it was on day 1. Let me see if I can find that. About the different, like a matrix of differences for yeah, this one here. This could be an interesting living document, I think, as well.
That would have a lot of value to not just our community, but any community, really.
Yeah.
To at least have an idea of that, and somehow navigate the issues, or provide information on navigating the issues. What I would kind of really love to see is, you know, we discussed so many different things in so many different areas, and we haven't even mentally been able to kind of condense today's discussions in with this. But I guess I would love to kind of hear if anyone has thoughts, or maybe a poll or something where people can provide feedback on what they think is the most important, or like the top 2 things. Because I'm very conscious that we can't all go off and do everything at once.
Actually, a really good idea. Maybe Jimmy, do you think that you could put these 6 items here into a poll and see which things might be most interesting to start with?
Yes, sir.
Doing the same for the large scale SIG, where we only picked 2 goals as like not trying to boil down the ocean, but, you know, just focus on a very limited set of early goals, because otherwise just get nothing done and everyone gets frustrated. And so it's easier to just select 1, 2, or 3 things, I think.
I would even avoid 3, but personally, but at least 1, maybe 2, just things that we can go, okay, let's keep having this discussion. Let's see if we can figure out a plan of action, and at least some next steps. So I guess I'm looking forward to seeing polling data.
It takes a little while.
Yeah, true. It does take a few minutes.
And I would add, actually, I should go in. I should add the one that we just added.
I think that's probably a good idea.
Let me fill that in right now.
I suspect it might end up becoming a focused subset, but we have to start someplace too, because it's kind of clear from the discussion that we need to work on it, improve the situation that we find ourselves in, and try and drive those commonalities.
And which one are you talking about from the end of the discussion just now around
Seeing if we can create some sort of automated security tooling or something to kind of make it more consistent and provide some of those control points and not control points, but more the tooling to help enable control point compliance.
So just to make sure I've got this, so we're talking about up to stateless and ephemeral bare metal workloads.
Yeah, and I think one more for the an open source project around automated security tooling. Ah, okay. This is. I was trying to keep the line that was on.
Okay, preparing to launch. It's multiple choice.
Are we going for two?
Yeah, but I don't think we should answer as if we want to influence. I think it should be what we think is the most impactful or most viable thing. Like if we were to set 2 goals for the next 6 months, what would they be? Or what should they be?
Well, the results are starting to pour in.
It's hard not to just pick everything.
That's not how prioritization works, James.
You could ask my team how I act with prioritization.
I can tell you how we prioritize. It usually involves some customer that escalates to some VP.
Squeaky wheel approach.
Yep.
I'm awful. I submitted 3 because I couldn't decide. I shall hang my head in shame.
Well, makes me feel better for doing the same.
What are the rules of the game? You can vote for 1 or as many as you want, or there's no numbering scheme, obviously.
2, 3, maybe 4.
You can vote for as many as you want, but voting for all of them ends up being the same as
voting for none.
Yeah.
And I don't think the poll is sophisticated enough to do stacked ranking.
Although maybe that should be the next step.
Yes.
Hi, Zoom, can you please implement SIF's functionality? Thanks.
They're in a code freeze right now.
They can't put in a Condorcet polling.
No, not today. I'll add it to the list though. Yeah, I mean, for the future, if you have some kind of weighted things, so you can have a priorities like 1, 2, 3. At least it will give us a little bit better, more information.
Okay, I think that it looks like the voting has slowed down, so I'm gonna close it in 30 seconds. So if you're sitting there agonizing over which ones to decide,
just pick and go.
okay, let's see the results here.
Well, we definitely see some winners here. Centralized matrix of firmware installation processes. That's very, very clear winner.
Not a very simple one to tackle.
Probably one of the more complex ones possible to tackle.
That's why it's valuable.
Right.
True.
Which is why it hasn't been done before.
Well, to my recollection, and Julie, you correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe we expose firmware management as a top-level Ironic API.
We don't expose, we've exposed settings. Steps are available to, at least by vendor, to do firmware updates actions. I think kind of the issue is exposing versions in an easy way to at least convey that. I mean, I think inspector data does have that in it though, at least if it's available. And it might be that some vendors we can't actually see in the certain devices.
It's okay. I mean, this is a clear winner, so I guess we'll have to go deeper discussion. What will it take to make it happen, or what can be done?
Yeah, I think one of the conundrums is just the variety of means and methods, and even packaging data and types for the stuff. So it's kind of, we almost need to create like a Venn diagram of cases and start with that.
Yeah,
and pick 3 of those and go from there.
Yeah, you can. I mean, you can specify firmware per each individual component of the hardware device, or you can specify the overall thing, whatever the recommended latest and greatest. But if you start breaking it apart, then who knows what combinations will work, and also what are the processes in terms of getting to that specific version, because there is ordering between the components too.
And a dependency map that it results.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
Maybe the idea to start with is tracking known good versions and known tested versions. That make I suspect that would make 80% of people's lives better by just starting with that. But I guess in a like a SIG discussion, we can continue that discussion, trying to figure out what the best path there is and how people might access and use that data, or how we might be able to make informed decisions there.
We published when we published ready architecture, reference architecture, we published which version the firmware was used. Since it's a cluster, it's not necessarily a single type of nodes, but for each node type, we have a specific versions which were validated. And that's
I think part of it's also may also be that there are certain features that might behave differently or might work differently too, that may otherwise be fine. Like doing X action on Y version you might have 80% of your functionality or 90%, but this one command just behaves a little differently. And it might be fixed, but people should know that they should upgrade, or at least what the best version to be on, or versions that are fully compatible. I don't know how we word it. That's for a SIG to decide.
Yep.
Yeah, so I guess it seems like in terms of the home for this follow-on work is the bare metal SIG the best place for this to be happening next. People have not been previously involved in that. Is that what they should start paying attention to, joining up with?
Well, not all of these things are particularly related to bare metal, not 100%. Like the security one, that's not bare metal. That's one that should flow back into other parts of OpenStack.
Oh, the security is SIG, but I don't think it covers this specific topic.
Yeah.
And maybe there's an opportunity for a larger discussion there, or just trying to figure out where we place that, or if we start with multiple places in the community as to where it would be good to have these discussions and try and raise this together.
Yeah.
This doesn't necessarily have to be one SIG.
Right.
Yeah.
Or one group, one project. Go ahead.
Right.
Sorry.
I suspect one of the reasons the security one hasn't been done yet is because you're right. I think it falls under a number of areas, and it kind of fell through the cracks.
Yeah, we can use pop-up teams to set up any type of work group that you're interested in forming to solve issues.
Right. Right, because I think it ends up in Neutron, at least to a certain extent, because that's what we're talking about.
It seems like Neutron probably originating from Neutron and then spreading outward based upon what we identify as the things that need to be controlled and audited and checked and all those various words.
Yep. No, I agree.
Jonathan, do we record the poll results somewhere on the Etherpad?
I put the polling order for each of the items that we had on the Etherpad here.
Not the percentages, just ordering. Got it.
Yeah, I didn't. Someone added the percentage for the number.
Yeah, I added the percentage on the one because I thought it kind of really highlighted that it was very popular.
Yeah. I got rid of the poll off of my screen, so I don't know how to get it back while I'm screen sharing. But
I took a screen grab of it.
Okay, we can add the percentages in there too. Well, so anything else? I mean, I think that this is a good set of potential actions and some indication on interest level at least, and it seems like that's there's maybe it's difficult, but it seems like it's worth discussing, especially this first one. Any other things that we didn't have on this list that we should write down before we wrap up the event and forget everything we talked about?
We mustn't forget what we talked about, but we also have Etherpads.
Yeah.
I really have nothing. Just I want to thank everyone for the last 3 days of awesome discussions.
Yeah, there's some great conversations.
Totally agree, and it was great. Yesterday, we had we had people who are making first-time connections, and that's one of the big values of having an open community, is getting to meet other people who are doing similar things, and then work with them, even though you're maybe not in the same org or city or country or whatever. So thought that was great to hear too. Well, with that, then I guess we can wrap up the wrap up, and thanks moderators for
You should mention the next one.
leading all the discussions. And yeah, I'm gonna let Ashley take it from here, and I'll just say thanks to everybody as well.
Well, thanks. Yes, so Beth is very excited about the next event, and so are we. We have a containers in production event coming up in August. That's just 2 or 3 weeks from now, so get ready for that one. You can register now at the website right there, openstack.org/opendev. There will be a link there and some more information. We already have a schedule up for that. So we'll be fleshing that out in the next couple of weeks. And then we have an Open Infrastructure Summit coming up as well. And everybody can attend this one because it is virtual, which is very exciting. And that'll be October 19th through the 23rd. And the CFP is open for that right now until August 4th. So go ahead and get your proposals ready, and we will get ready to review them. And then let's see, what do we have after this? So for this event, we'll drop a link in. We would love your feedback just around event logistics, topics, any feedback you have for us, we want to hear it. So we're dropping an Etherpad in right now. So go ahead and tell us what you thought of this event and any ways that we can improve it. We'd love to hear from you. And then we also had a lot of new people on this call. It's great to, make connections and everything. So if you're running OpenStack, please take the user survey. That is probably one of the most helpful ways that you can get involved and let the community know your feedback for the software so that we can actually implement it and make improvements. So that's really important. So we're dropping a link in right now. So make sure to fill that out when you have a chance. And I believe that's it. So we will hopefully see you at the next events. And thank you so much to all of our moderators and sponsors and everybody who joined. So with that, I will say farewell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye now.